Hey everybody. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Shoot. Um, just going to send Luke an invite. Here we go. And go. There. Did I lose my audience? What happened to that?
Well, I'm trying.
Oh, you're here, Lance? I don't know what happened. We just got kicked out. Oh, there's Luke. Okay.
It's kind of sad.
I have no idea, Phoebus, what happened. But Lance was down here in the corner. Lance, did you? I threw up a link, Lance. Maybe you can, if you want to join, feel free.
Yeah.
But maybe when Lance was in there, he hit the wrong button or something. But
So
anyway,
will this be like 2 streams now or something?
dreams.
Right on.
I titled it. I didn't write part 2, but
No, I love it. This is why this is what I'm here for.
yeah. Well, I'm glad people found us again.
Yeah, that's cool.
Oh yeah, see, Lance says he might have crashed it trying to post the picture. Okay.
Oh,
No worries.
don't apologize.
No worries, Lance.
Do not apologize.
No worries. Yeah.
Sherry,
Okay.
I know you were sharing a thought on straight lines, and I did have a thought in conjunction, but it was just the fact that my children draw outside of the lines, and so I feel like that was my whole thought when you're writing that, and the kind of like they teach children to draw inside of the lines as if that's like an achievement or like what they're supposed to be doing, and when the reality is when you have guidance to like you got to draw inside of this shape or this inside of these lines, it's like it's like a cheat. It's kind of like a cheat code of like you just, and then when you start free forming your own shapes, when you start becoming the artist and you are creating your own world on with whatever medium you're choosing to create your art with,
Right.
you're not relying on anybody else's shapes anymore. You're not, and coloring books are fun and nice and they're easy, but like my son can't even handle that right now at 2.5. He's like,
No.
why? Like, he doesn't even get it. Like, why would I be doing that?
Right.
So, that was my thought.
Yeah, that's true. But I think there's also benefit to
the margins.
Well, because I talked about that in that live stream with what's his name, Jordan Wood, about following the lines and the limitations, right?
Yeah.
But that's not straight line stuff, right? That's actually following the line that is given by nature. So this is what Goethe did. Yeah. And this is also what Hundertwasser's talking about when he says, these lines are not how does he put it? Something about the image of God, like they're godless and immoral. And I'm just like, and where I first heard that quote from Ian McGilchrist, he read it preceding or at the beginning of one of his lectures. And I was just like, oh, who is this guy? And I started getting into Hundertwasser stuff. So,
well, my old literature professor, he would always say, even when talking about form, he was like, all poetry, even free verse, it collapses into form. Like you can't really get outside of form.
No.
Because these things are in nature and you can't get outside of nature. So it's like there's kind of these margins already imposed. But I do definitely agree with you that there's a kind of liberation that comes with restriction.
With the limitation, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
with
Yeah, that's the beauty of constraint, right? Like the way constraint brings about creativity. So
Wendell Berry has a really good essay called "Poetry in Marriage" in his book. Oh gosh, Standing by Words. So he's got a collection of essays called "Standing by Your Words," and there's a really good essay in defense of formal poetry
right.
as marriage and the interchange that takes place in marriage and the formal poetry.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's bang on. I don't know why.
We'll have to do a few of those. So many times people, well, you and Shelley also has shared Wendell Berry stuff with me. And I've never bought any of his poetry. I've never bought any of his books. So I haven't really gotten into it on my own. And I don't think you can well, maybe you can on poetry.org or something, read his stuff, but
Sure.
I never have.
There's a paywall. How dare he?
Yeah, well, he's still alive, right? He's got to put food on the table. Once he dies, we can read it for free.
Amen. All right.
All right. Do you want to keep going or you want me to read some?
Would you like to begin?
I don't mind. Where were we? Okay, so we were talking about, I know, here. Vasari, the Italian painter who walked around the streets and also woke up his wife at night, constantly repeating what a lovely thing this perspective is.
Yep.
And then Leonardo's reflections led him to the conclusion that you should make your picture look like a natural scene reflected in a large mirror. And naturally, when the camera obscura came and he heard of it, he soon went on to it. It seems so obvious, and yet apparently something had to happen. Something quite out of the experience of the Greeks and of the Egyptians, who were also no mean geometricians, to make it appear even possible, let alone obvious, to imitate nature by that simple trick. And now, when it did come at last, after all those years, here was a simple mechanical device that brought the fruit of years of technical study and experiment by great painters within the reach of every Tom, Dick, and Harry. All he needed was a pencil and a steady hand, enough to trace accurately. The art of imitating had been reduced to the technique of copying. The next step in the camera sequence was to do away with even the pencil and the steady hand, for the camera obscura led to the invention of the daguerreotype, and so to that of the photograph. And then the advent of the photograph did something which could hardly have been anticipated by those who had invented it, though it may well be that it would not have worried them if it had. It all took a little time, but one thing that the photograph did was to kill stone dead. And then in brackets he has, well, not quite stone dead, for the wound has only proved mortal in our own time. Just to kill stone dead, just that leading principle of aesthetic theory, that principle of art, which had held sway at least from the time of Aristotle down to the 18th century, the theory that the function of the artist is to imitate nature. The imitation of nature, now that it was being done by applying the sweet rules of perspective, had become altogether too easy, so easy that you could make a little gimmick that would do it all for you. Yeah. The camera sequence is not altogether simple to narrate. It betrays a certain leapfrogging element. Long before photography was invented, while it was still in embryo as the camera obscura, the next step which properly succeeds photography had already been taken. It had been taken, in fact, by Athanasius Kircher himself, for it is generally agreed that Kircher was the inventor of what used to be called the magic lantern. Perhaps it still is. That particular toy does not receive pictures into itself, but with the help of artificial light inside it, it projects. Repeat, projects them back onto the world outside itself. normally onto a blank screen or a blank wall or some kind of tabula rasa. But even if the wall is not blank, provided the artificial light is bright enough, the picture will be projected and it will either mix with or obliterate for the spectator whatever's actually on the wall. Hastening now to a conclusion, the next step was, of course, to run a lot of these projected pictures together. It was the step from still to motion, from the magic lantern to the movie. And the last step of all followed quickly, from the movie to television. Only here at last do we reach the toy in which Marshall McLuhan's Herr Gutenberg and his successors probably have had as big a hand as Kircher himself and his successors. Only in the technique of television does the art of printing enter the long camera sequence that began with Kircher's camera obscura and his magic lantern. Let us contemplate for a moment the enormous contrast between the camera and the wind harp. So now he's given us a history of camera and wind harp. Now he's going to bring them together in the essay. Taken as typifying the process of perception. Okay. The process of perception is the means by which what is there outside of us, what is going on out there, becomes our own experience. The harp's medium is air, on which, of course, sound is born to us, and air is something that is itself both inside and outside of us. Apart from its use in perception, it is entering and leaving us all day and all night, from the day we are born until the moment we cease to breathe. In order that we may perceive by means of it, it has to enter quite a long way into the body before, within the labyrinth of the ear, it is converted into sensations of sound. The word inspiration, as doctors use it, means taking physical air, oxygen, into our lungs. But the same word in common parlance always suggests taking something else in along with the oxygen. The sounding harp, in fact, may be taken as the emblem of inspiration. By contrast, the camera's medium is light, and light does not enter into the body at all. It is stopped short at the surface of the eye, and you know how often the eye has been compared to a mirror. From that point on, what happens is, so to speak, our own affair. But as to what actually does happen to give us the experience of seeing, whether there are produced replicas or internal reproductions, or what you will, of the world outside us, that is something that has been argued about almost since argument began. It is very much easier to shut our eyes than it is to shut our ears. What exactly is it that is there when our eyes are open, but is no longer there when they are shut? Okay, we should sit with that a little bit.
Yeah.
What exactly is there when our eyes are open, but is no longer there when they are shut? Okay, I put a link in here, guys. If anybody wants to watch, jump in. Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. That's good.
That I was when he wrote that, I was thinking of Kerouac, where he has this poem at the end of Big Sur where he's like imitating the sounds of the ocean, and I wish I could send it, because it's just like it's just
I think you did send it to me once.
it's all these onomatopoeias, and he's just flowing back and forth, like just making the sounds of the ocean with his mouth, and it does sound like music, but it's punctuated with all these consonants and vowels and these different, like these words that are not part of the English language, but are noises that we can we can make and use whatever language we want to represent it. If you could translate it, it's just the sound of the ocean.
I think wasn't it with you that I talked about how when I start as a kid, I used to sing songs. That was and I would just make up and it would be whatever I was feeling, right? And then as I got older, the melodies fell away, and I started writing Um,
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think I might be right. I don't know. I read all of Kerouac's books. I can't
yeah.
remember where.
The melodies fell away, but I always felt like I had actually um, tapped into something greater when I could write a poem that rhymed. And I mean, you can really do bad rhyming poetry, of course. But when you do good rhyming poetry, that's just like a double whammy for
Hmm.
me. Because it has that rhythm, right? It retains the rhythm. And I think it's kind of I kind of mourn the loss of people trying to do that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely agree. And I think there's a, if we're talking about approaching even like, because I think there is a way in which there's a childlikeness in that approach, which I think is,
mhm,
if we view childlikeness even as in, if we look at it chronologically as a movement towards the preconscious state, as an emergence from a preconscious state into consciousness, like
mhm.
there's a way in which you can see there's a connection to there's a connection to this unconscious preconscious emergence. You get what I'm saying. I don't have the words for it, but it is,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that is lost in our attempt to um, have any kind of perfect articulation, to form a proposition, to be able to say things clearly. We lose the music of the origin of poetry. So I, you know,
Yeah. And a lot of rhyming words are simple and short, and those are old words, right? Like
hmm
I've heard it said, and I'm not a, what do they call them? Linguist, but not, I've never studied language, but a lot of the old words are the short words, right? Um, like Lance used one. Here it is, right here.
yeah,
It's the first word that the Stone Age guys used.
yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely,
what do you think he means
yeah.
by what exactly is it that is there when our eyes are open but is no longer there when they are shut? He says, okay, I'm going to go on. With the different attempts at answering that question, you could fill a line or two of a dictionary. You would need as much simply for the different names that have been given to what is there. Forms, phantoms, idols, simulacra, effigies, films are some of them. In Lucretius alone, you find a whole mine of different synonyms for this mysterious panorama that the eye delivers to us. But they all mean something like, or some part of, what the word image means. And image is perhaps the word most commonly employed. The camera, then, can fairly be seen as an emblem, or perhaps this time one should rather say a caricature of imagination. The Italian word camera means a room or chamber, and the camera is, of course, a hollow box or a little dark room. Unlike the camera, the harp has no inside. It does not first of all receive into itself stimuli from without and then respond to them. The wind harp becomes what it is by itself, becoming an inside for the environing air, by becoming a modulated voice for it to speak with. If the eyes are shut and there is no other guide, it is very difficult to tell where any particular sound comes from, presumably because the air and its contents are all around us. Well, light and its contents are also all around us, but our eyes are so made that they leave us in no doubt where those contents are placed and how they are disposed. The two sorts of arrangement are very different, And that difference is really all we mean by the word perspective. I'll read that again. The two sorts of arrangement are very different, and that difference is really all we mean by the word perspective. So that's
Mm.
the difference between eyes and ears, air and light. Light comes to us impartially from all directions, and you might think that our point of view out into it would diverge from the eye in lines going out in all directions into space, at least in all directions open to it. Actually, the opposite occurs. If we see in perspective as we normally do, we have to make those lines converge to one particular point, which is usually called the vanishing point. The farther off from us and from each other in space things are in space, the nearer they must be in our picture to the vanishing point, and therefore to each other. Now, that is not the way we think about space, it is the way we see it. We vaguely fancy there is a difference between view and point of view, but in fact, there is none. The eye, seeing in perspective, is projecting its own point of view, its punctiliar nothingness, as I would like to call it, into what geometricians call the plane at infinity. But the ordinary man has to imagine as something like the inside of a vast hollow shell. By doing so, the eye converts that hollow sphere into a tableau that reduces depth to surface and flattens through dimensions into only two. That is the immediate experience so faithfully recorded by the camera. If there were no such immediate experience, photographs would not be lifelike. You know, I'm just thinking now of how, so you have a photograph, and the only way that you can get a sense of three dimensions is by the shadows in the photograph. So a really good photographer can capture a moment in time, or a certain expression or whatever, which gives you a sense of someone's consciousness at that moment, right? Where are they? Up here.
Yeah.
Or like a larger consciousness, if it's like a landscape. What is the landscape, talking about?
Sure.
By the shadows, right? That the photographer is like acutely aware of. Okay. And so as I was reading that, it was just kind of dawning on me, if the reason Carl Jung started to think about shadow and shadow work
as revealing,
as an actual, revealing, like it changes it changes your perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Then it kind of makes sense that it would come on the coattails of this evolution of consciousness with perspective, the camera sequence, and all the rest of that. That is really,
yeah. No, that's a
really interesting.
really good insight.
Racco, were you on the other live stream and then we disappeared?
Yeah. This is our
had a little glitch. We had a little glitch because Lance was trying to help us out with the diagram, and then technology and all that stuff, but we're back. Thanks for finding us again. So anyway, that just dawned on me. I'm like, oh, I wonder, because anyway, I'll just go read some more.
Well, I wanted to say something first too, is with sight being the sense, in my opinion, I would say that we favor sight above almost all other sensory perceptions. If I didn't see it, Pixar, it didn't happen. Pixar, it didn't happen. That's a perfect example of a modern understanding of, I won't even believe it if I can't see it, So we emphasize sight. And the reality is I think that especially for, well, I won't say that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is it sort of ignores all the other sensibilities and highlights one, over all the rest of them. When we have hi Lance.
Failed contributor.
We've got a lot of other sensibilities to consider here, and why is there one? Why is the one sense that we probably should maybe trust the least, the one we highlight as the greatest, and it's probably likely due to the invention of the camera or the consciousness that did emerge to invent the camera, which we see as you know what emerged through the Renaissance. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is this very idea that our senses are this idea that we can trust our senses. Well, like how come we're only trusting sight,
You
or
know
our
what?
corporeal senses versus like what's beyond? There's a lot of sensory perceptions that aren't just touch, hearing, taste, smell.
Yeah, when you're asking this question about like, do we remember? Wait, where'd it go? Do we remember sight? Do we remember sight most? No,
Smell.
apparently smell is the one most connected to our memories.
Our limbic system.
And and I find that really interesting. Like, I remember as a kid one time I had a dream, and well, I didn't I don't know what it was. It happened to, I've talked to a few people that have had this experience too since. And I remember waking up and I could smell bacon and coffee in the kitchen. And it was dark in my room. It was still night. And then as soon as I could smell that, I could hear dishes clanking and voices. And I remember I climbed out of my bed, and I was just, I don't know, like 6 or something. Climbed out of my bed and ran to the kitchen. I was all excited, and there was nobody there. And I just remember feeling so creeped out. I was like, what the? Because I could smell it all. I could just totally, it was just amazing.
What a bummer you couldn't have any breakfast either. You were like, oh man.
And I was like, I was this kid that used to get up in the night anyways and wander around and do stuff because I don't know, I just had a very active imagination. And so I was all excited that my family was up before the sun because I liked that.
Yeah,
But
one of
anyway.
the things that if you guys have been this constant time while you guys have been talking about, and he's talking about the breath and the light and
Mhm.
the alien harp, and then that I've just been overwhelmed by the sense that spirit in Christ, right? So spirit, ruach, is the breath, right? And so it's moving and blowing, and so you have that harmony, you've got that there. And then it talked about light being all around us, right? And so
Mhm.
we obviously the light that came into the world. So we have these dual aspects, right? And I'm just as I'm listening to this, I don't know where he's going to go to this. And then ultimately, those that have eyes to see, right, and ears to hear, and he's touching on the vibrations there. That I just see this mapping on that ultimate reality, right, of breath and
Yeah.
light, of spirit in Christ. It's quite a it's I haven't anyway this whole time, and the more I'm reading it, like these things, as you guys keep going like that stuff, it just kind of keeps building on that.
Yeah. And I have to admit, I have a really hard time following Barfield because he's very propositional. So, like, I can totally follow George MacDonald because he talks in, kind of my language, but I always struggle with Barfield. And but I think he's fair enough in this essay. Like, he's making incremental advancements in his ideas as we go. But I just wanted to say, McMo, why don't you jump in if you can?
Yeah.
And it would be great. It'd be great. Okay,
Remember,
so
he
mhm,
says Saint Dustin is also the patron saint of the blind.
yeah.
Whether there is any significance in that, I shall leave you to ask yourselves at the end of the lecture.
And I keep thinking about how Meister Eckhart says, "Don't believe your old eyes."
Oh,
right? He has that line, "Don't believe your old eyes," and he's talking about like our actual eyes.
because like scales and shit.
Hmm. But it's also interesting that with the magic lantern comes projection. And I mean, there is the whole idea of like psychological projection, projecting all your crap onto people. Yeah. Um, but it gets better, folks. I know it's a bit dry, but hang in there. It gets really good. Okay, so where were we? Caricature. The camera is a caricature of imagination, although it is a true emblem of perspective. Imagination is living, perspective only life-like. It used to be said that the camera cannot lie, but in fact it always does lie. Just because it looks only in that immediate way, the camera looks always at and never into what it sees. I suspect Medusa did very much the same. Well, then, along come the magic lantern and the movie, and they project all over again that very projection of punctiliar nothingness, that very film which the camera itself produced by projection in the first place. Perhaps it is not surprising that project and projection have become such very loaded words. What a history they have behind them. A student of the history of words and their meanings is apt to acquire a rather profound skepticism concerning the shared mental horizon of his contemporaries. He notices that when poets use metaphors, they at least know they are doing so. But nobody else seems to know it, although they are not only speaking, but also thinking in metaphors all the time. I recall very well when I was writing my early book, History in English Words, being astonished at the ubiquitous appearance of the clock as a metaphor shortly after it had been invented. It turned up everywhere, where anybody was trying to describe the way things work in nature. Then the clocks stopped, but the metaphor went on. The student of words and their meanings and the history of them asks himself uneasily, this Newton, Kant, Laplace universe in which the 19th century found itself so much at home, was it after all much more than a metaphorical clockwork? But unfortunately, he can't stop there. Coming a little nearer to our own time, he finds the psychology of the unconscious, in which the first half of the 20th century felt so much at home. Strange how squarely it seems to be based on an image of repression, which is much the same as compression. Was it, after all, just the steam engine in disguise? So good. Like he's talking about how we invent things and then we invent the thing that is already evolving in our consciousness. It's anyway. Was it okay? We live in the age of E equals mc squared, the atomic age. We've discovered or have told ourselves that matter does not produce energy, but that matter is energy. And we bestow our eager attention on the smallest possible detached unit of matter, expecting to find there the ultimate, still source of all energy. Yes, and we also live in the age of existentialism. So it is that, in the age of the movie, the student of words who is unfashionable enough to examine their history as well as their current use is not perhaps so impressed as some others are by the universal practice of projection, not only in movie houses and on television screen, but also as a concealed metaphor in the ingenious fancies of men. Is projection itself being projected? He finds, for instance, scientists and philosophers joining hands to assure us that the familiar world around us is a projection of our own mental apparatus onto a kind of wall of imperceptible realities. Not perhaps a blank wall, but it might just as well be blank for all the resemblance it bears to anything we do actually see or hear. Or again, when he turns to the psychologist, he finds projections, or perhaps they might also be called projectiles, form of neuroses, fantasies, mother images, father fixations, feelings of guilt, and various parts of the body, including its secreta and excreta, flying to and fro among them, so thick and fast that he has to duck to avoid them. Or again, When the psychologists join hands with the anthropologists, he sees a whole cloud of these projectiles flying off in the same direction and landing on the same target, namely the mind of that luckless repository primitive man. One thing at least is made very clear from what all of these informative people are fond of telling us about primitive man, and that is that whatever else he was doing, he was always projecting his insides onto something or other. It was his principal occupation. He must presumably have had one or two other things to do as well. But that was what he majored in. The 18th century, used to talk of a ruling passion, but there is also the ruling metaphor. Perhaps for reading the signs of the times, it is a good deal more important. Let us assume for a moment that it is, and ask ourselves how much of all this stuff would ever have been heard of if Kircher had never invented his magic lantern. Was he, while inventing it, engaged at the same time in inventing, for example, the anthropological theory of animism? We might even go on to ask, except that the question is one that is never raised in humane academic circles, how much of it all is true? After all, it is we who actually have got the magic lantern and the camera. It is we who have got perspective, both in pictures and in photographs, together with the habit of vision, which they have raised and fostered. Could it be ourselves who are doing the projecting when we talk of primitive man in that confident way? Was he a magic lantern? Was he even a camera obscura? Are we so sure that he even had any inside to speak of? The punctiliar sort that projects? Now, I personally am quite sure that he had not. Moreover, I'm firmly persuaded that we shall never get anywhere with our anthropological attempts at reconstructing the mind of primitive man until we make up our minds to throw away all this projection business. If we must think in metaphor, and we must, why not try beginning again on the assumption that primitive man was not a camera obscura, but an alien harp? I'm going to stop there for a minute. So if the primitive man, I'm just going to say this for my own sake, if the primitive man was a camera obscura, that meant he was hollow inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just imaging what, his empty insides? Or he was projecting the world around him? Projecting. But now he wants to say that the primitive man was actually an aeolian harp played by the breath, the wind, the spirit. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Go. I'm just thinking.
No, like the juxtaposition there is well, I almost see this modern man as this persistent regurgitation of these images, which are, what does he call them? Phantoms? Like it's almost like this non-reality of consistent projections and consumption and projection and consumption, because that's what you're doing is like, and so it's, I don't know. I had another thought.
Yeah.
And this goes back to McMo, because he was like, what does this have to do with memory or something like that? He said above. And
yeah.
Let me know what you guys think about this. I'm just going to throw this out there. Is I see the camera as an image of the Renaissance, as the image of modern man, as a symbol of modern man. I see the camera as serving us, like the ease at which we can recreate and nature, the ease at which we can now do this. It serves us an onslaught of images on a silver platter. So there's no work or effort involved in the consumption of these. There's no preparation.
No, well, there's no experiential moment, right? Like you don't have to spend the whole day in the in the mountains painting and listening to the birds, and
No.
like
Yeah.
you're just showing up, and he gets into that.
Yeah, and we'll get there. But my thought is, like, we live in this world where we have all these attention issues. We have all sorts of degenerative neurological diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. And I have to wonder if there is a relation between the cameraman and
the alien Harp man.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the cameraman, this modern impulse to create the camera and to operate within the camera, and the emergence of these memory related neurological issues.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's kind of the connection that I was trying to get to, is like that we're served these things on a silver platter. We don't have to work for them.
And there's no other sensual, like there's no other senses involved. Like when you pick up a photo, you're not using anything else, right? So you're
not even exercising.
Sorry if I'm not getting this, but this is how difficult it is for me sometimes with these things. Okay, yeah, okay, now I understand what you're saying. So you're not
Took
having
me a while to get there.
Yeah, you're not having a fully sensual experience. You're just using your eyes to take something in. And so then your memory is, not fully engaged.
And I was kind of thinking about, he mentioned the TV, right? But now we have these.
I know.
Everything else, and just the screens and these projections, like the Grim Grizz is on here set, right? It's just this barrage of projected images versus the depth and the wind of, like, sitting out in the mountains, right? Or just being outside and getting smell, right? Just the whole
and sound and touch. And this isn't the first time that Barfield has critiqued movies. I've read it it might even be Saving the Appearances, I can't remember, but he talks about flickering lights. And I remember coming down from the goat barn in the wintertime. Gets dark early, and I could see the TV in the house. And it's just like boom, 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 And I thought, man, that's so aggressive. That's what I was thinking. And I was imagining my kids sitting in front of it and just being like bombarded, And I do know that, like old movies, for example, the scenes were long and drawn out. And we've gotten to the point now where I don't know how many seconds between scenes, but it's not much, right? So there's just cut, and all this. Yeah. Anyways, that's a different topic, but.
Well, and just think about what TikTok is doing. So like Gail Zeldin did this, he asked the kids in his high school classroom, and 80% of them are getting their news and everything off TikTok. And so we're getting to this even shorter and shorter, and they're wiring. I mean, kids' brains are getting wired.
It's getting wired. Right? It is, yeah.
And I think about that. That's that emptiness. And he makes the case that they were not the camera obscura, but they were the alien harp, right? Which is harmony, right? Breath, which is very different. It's not empty, right? But we can see. You almost think about for all of us that are addicted to this screen life right now, these projections, it is literally creating an emptiness. I mean, people are longing, right? They're almost empty. They're desiring communion, community,
and that comes through being, okay, so like he says at the beginning, like the light doesn't enter the body, right? But the wind, like the sound that that the wind and the spirit plays, it comes in the body, right? We feel it inside.
I mean, and breath, right?
Yeah,
we were breathing, like when you're saying the air, that was
the air is out.
It's in us. Exactly. It's out.
He mentioned it.
Well, think about reading a George MacDonald novel, and maybe not all of you have, but you're reading a description, and your mind has to come up with these images from the words that you're reading on the page, versus serving a crystalline image that you don't have to you don't have to move. You don't even have to make a movement in your cognition. All you have to do is observe it. Like your mind literally has to do nothing.
Yeah.
But when you're reading a book or whatever else, maybe you're on a mountaintop, your cognition actually has to work and move. It has to engage.
Yep.
And when you're served crystalline images, and I think crystalline is a perfect word for it because they're so rigid.
Yeah.
It is ossified. It is stasis. There's no movement to it. There's nothing fluid in it. There's no breath. It's not living, and I think sorry, I'm like yelling. Why am I doing that?
You're passionate. You're passionate about this.
I'm like, woo, he's preaching. I like it. Okay, I'm going to keep reading so we can maybe try to get it done because the best part's yet to come here.
Oh yeah, it gets really good, and it touches on what McMo's talking about above too.
Yeah, I know. That's why I want McMo's falling asleep on us, so we gotta hurry up. Okay. If we must think in metaphor, and we must, why not try beginning again on the assumption that primitive man was not a camera obscura but an Aeolian harp? Surely it is only by this route that we can hope to understand the origin of myths and of thinking at all. Leslie Fiedler, writing on the myth, noted a distinction between two elements we can detect in it. He called them respectively archetype and signature. The signature being that part of a narrative myth which has been contributed by an individual mind or minds. That is a useful distinction, but its usefulness in the long run will depend upon what we are prepared to mean by the word archetype. It will depend on our accepting the central truth which no one who writes today on the subject does appear to accept, though I should have thought it had been made clear even more than half a century ago by Rudolf Steiner. The truth that it was not man who made the myths, but the myths, or the archetypal substance they reveal, which made man. So this is getting back to now his way of his perception of how these things come about. Like when he says we talk about repression or compression, I think that's a nod at Freud, right? And he says, and then suddenly appear, that kind of language appears with the steam engine. So it's just so fascinating. I love it how he puts these things together.
Yeah.
Okay. We shall have to come, I am sure, to think of the archetypal element in myth in terms of the wind that breathes through the harp strings of individual brains and nerves and fluids, rather as the blood still today pervades and sustains them. Then, when we have started off on the right foot instead of the wrong one, we may come fruitfully on to the problem Shelley had to deal with from a rather different point of view, the problem of the wind harp that is nevertheless played on by a performer. Then we shall come, properly equipped, to the problem of that principle within the human being, as Shelley called it, which acts otherwise than in the lyre and produces not melody alone, but harmony. We shall approach in the right way the problem of beings, to quote Shelley again, harmonized by their own will. Did that enthusiasm of the Romantics for the wind harp signify that they had come to see the history of the Western mind as a kind of war between the harp and the camera? That they foresaw the camera civilization that was coming upon us? If so, they were true prophets, because it certainly has come. The camera, up to date, has won that war. I love this part, we live in a camera civilization. Our entertainment is camera entertainment. Our holidays are camera holidays. We make them so by paying more attention to the camera we brought with us than to the waterfall we are pointing it at. Our science is almost entirely a camera science. One thinks of the photographs of electrons on screens and in cloud chambers and so forth. Our philosophers, it is no longer possible even to argue with most of them because you cannot argue about an axiom. And it is already becoming self-evident to cameraman that only camera words have any meaning. Even our poetry has become, for the most part, camera poetry. So much of it consists of those pointedly paradoxical surface contrasts between words and between random thoughts and feelings arranged in the complicated perspective of the poet's own, often rather meager personality. Where, one asks, has the music gone? Where has the wind gone that sweeps the music into being? The Hagion Pneuma, the Ruach Elohim. It really does feel as though the camera had won hands down and smashed the harp to pieces. Perhaps it is just this defeat which the guitar-loving hippies had somehow got wind of, but I do not myself believe that the way out of defeat lies in substituting the harp for the camera. So this is also very Barfieldian. Like, you can't go back, right? You got to go through. But I do not myself believe that the way out of defeat lies in substituting the harp for the camera, except, of course, as an aid to historical imagination. For I do not believe that the root from which the camera sequence originally sprang is an unmitigated evil. I even believe it was a necessity. But then neither do I believe that the existence of separate autonomous human spirits is an unmitigated evil. I traced the camera sequence from a beginning only about as far back as the 17th century, but its root is much older than that. It began, I would say, as soon as signature was added to and interwoven with archetype in the structure and substance of myth. That is the same as saying that it began as soon as poetry began to exist within myth. At first within, and then alongside of it. And that again is to say, it is something that lies within our destiny. Is not this a truth which the most penetrating minds among the romantics themselves came to realize? It is interesting to note that whereas in Shelley we found only that rather perplexed transition from a wind harp to a harpist's harp, Coleridge, who lived so much longer and had more time to think out a full theory of poetry, does not omit the camera obscura from the imagery he chooses. In the Biographia Literaria, by way of comment on Milton's wonderful description of the banyan tree in Paradise Lost, he writes, "This is creation rather than painting, or if painting, yet such and with such copresence of the whole picture flashed at once upon the eye as the sun paints in a camera obscura." Coleridge, you see, converts it from a caricature into a true emblem of imagination. How? By placing the sun instead of the punctiliar nothingness at the vanishing point, which, as he well knew, was really the point of projection from within the eye of the beholder. Wow. After all, however it may have been for primitive man, we cannot in our time get away with projection altogether. The mind of man is not an Aeolian harp. That is another sentence from the Biographia Literaria, reneging rather sharply, it would seem, from the point of view expressed in the author's youthful poem I quoted to begin with. The mind is at least not wholly an Aeolian harp. For us, there must be projection, and the question for the 20th century is whether it is to be a projection of nothingness or a projection of the sun spirit. Shush. Shush. Or a projection of the sun spirit, the spirit of light. Is not this why in the same book we find Coleridge quoting that sentence from Plotinus, quote, "The eye could never have beheld the sun if it were not itself of the same nature as the sun." Mm-hmm. The sentence which also meant so much to Goethe, and which he rephrased in the form, quote, "If the eye were not of the same nature as the light, it could never behold the light." If then the story of the harp and the camera is to continue, instead of ending with a whimper, it will have to be by way of a true marriage between the one and the other. Is it fanciful, I wonder, to think of a sort of mini harp stretched across the window of the eye, an Apollo's harp, if you will, as perhaps not a bad image for the joy of looking with imagination? Hang on a second. Come on. So. My creatures.
You got a bear out there, Sherry.
Something, yeah. That joy, as will be well known here, was precisely the thing which C.S. Lewis spent most of his life discovering more about, discovering in particular that it is by no means the same thing as pleasure or happiness or contentment. In a literary climate which has already become all camera and no harp, all signature and no archetype, we ought not to forget that little group, if group is the right word, which has sometimes been referred to as Oxford Christians and sometimes as romantic theologians, and with which this college has, thanks to the devotion and energy of Dr. Kilby, established a very special connection. For they may perhaps have contributed their mite to the continuation of the story. The German poet and thinker Novalis, you know, specifically compared with an Aeolian harp the Märchen, or adult fairy tale, that modern variant of the myth in which signature may mingle fruitfully with archetype, but without swamping it all together. The passage where he does so was selected by George MacDonald as the motto to his own Märchen, Fantastes, which played, as he has told us, such a crucial part in the literary and spiritual development of C.S. Lewis. Besides giving us Märchen of their own, both Lewis and Tolkien, and their comrade in arms, Charles Williams, thought deeply and wrote well on the place of myth, Märchen, myth and Märchen in our modern consciousness. One way or another, they were all three concerned with the problem of imagination. And there is perhaps no piece of writing that deals more gently and genially with the place of imagination in the literature of the future than Tolkien's essay on fairy stories in the volume Essays Presented to Charles Williams. At least that is so, if I am right in suggesting, as I have been trying to suggest by my own rather devious route, that the ultimate question to which imagination holds the key is the question of how we can learn to sign our own names to what we create, whether as myth or in other ways, but so nevertheless that we sign as our own will also, that what we sign as our own will also be the name of another, the name, I would venture to say, without venturing to pronounce it, of the author and the lord of the archetypes themselves. And that is the end of the essay. So we got some insider information on the Inklings.
Yeah.
From Harp there. McMo, you're still here?
He's still awake.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a thought at the very end of this essay now, reading it again, that I feel like I need to comment on.
Yeah. Because
I was very confused when Barfield earlier talked about the human as a harp playing like, what is the human element? What does the poet add to the breath that's being breathed through them? And I think this truly, at the end of the essay, Barfield reveals this as Sherry, the integrity of that human being.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is what
their signature, right? Is that what you're equating that?
Yeah. Like at the end of the essay, he says that. And I'm like, how did I miss that? I think he's answering what Shelley's question is.
Yeah.
Shelley's question is like, what is, because the human has their own will, right?
Right.
But is that will, is that will working in opposition? I don't, it's kind of clear as to what.
That makes sense actually, because he in Romanticism Comes of Age, he kind of criticizes Coleridge because Coleridge was going to write apparently, according to Barfield, Coleridge was going to write a chapter on imagination, and from my memory, I got the idea that it was some religious person in office who said, maybe you should just, not do that. And so he took the guy's advice and he didn't. And Barfield said that Coleridge kind of stopped short, right? And I always got the feeling that Romanticism Comes of Age, and now I think for me, this essay actually makes that concrete, is that's actually what the Inklings did, was they filled it out. They wrote the chapter that Coleridge refused to write. And I would even say that George MacDonald did that first, right?
Yeah.
But then they just kind of put it on, in a more, I don't know, modern setting.
They resurrected.
Because when I heard that about romantic, that essay on Coleridge and Romanticism Comes of Age, my first thought was the imagination essays by George MacDonald. Those were the chapters that Coleridge never wrote. And I know that George MacDonald was a Coleridge, like.
And you're saying Coleridge had it in him, but he didn't dare.
According to Barfield, it was kind of like he just backed off, because the imagination has always been suppressed by, the institutions, whether political or religious, honestly.
Yeah.
When he was saying sun, was that S-O-N?
Yeah, S-U-N.
It was.
Wait.
Okay, was it S-U-N?
Yeah, he was saying the sun. I love that point too. Like that the horizon line is not a point of disappearance, but a point of light, like a point of, I don't know.
And it was S-O-N?
S-U-N.
S-U-N.
The eye could never have beheld the sun if it were not itself of the same nature of the sun. And oh man, I know, it was Jordan Daniel Wood mentioned. He actually mentioned that that ancient people thought that light came from your eyes, like that there was light coming from your eyes too. And like, this is where my scholarly capabilities, I don't have any. but I know that Goethe actually shows in his theory of color that is the case. That you perceive from the light that comes out of your eyes. And but I can't quote anything to prove that. But if anybody wants to know more about that, just have to dig into Goethe's theory of color, because it's very, very interesting.
Well, which is funny when he sticks there, ruah, right? Breath, like that. I was sitting there, and that was this thing that was imaging out of that. So, he was tipping it off, and you could feel that. And then, I guess even though it's S-U-N, in Orthodox liturgies, they talk about the Son of Righteousness out of the East,
totally.
Right? That troparion.
Yeah.
And so that's okay. And it's, and I think even going back to that, like I would just kept thinking like that. One of the first comments I made, like even for us, which is imaging force, like we are images, right? Imagination,
right?
Like that.
And George MacDonald in that faith essay, he says, "Let your light shine."
Right.
Okay. But that is your integrity, your image, the who you really are kind of thing. And it comes when you follow your conscience, right? Your light shines when you do the thing that God has put before you, right? So it's not an imitation, right? Which is this is all George MacDonald, and Barfield's actually illuminating it. Actually, George is now illuminating it for me, because I understand George way better than Barfield. But yeah, don't set examples, right? Which would be that flat imitative photo, right? The camera thing. George MacDonald says, don't set an example. He says, you have no right to be an example or something along those lines, to be an example or to set an example.
And I was thinking, what's that thing of Joseph? I don't have the words right, but there was that rabbi that meeting God is, I didn't wish you were a better this, but I wish you were a better you. What's that? I wish, basically it was like, I didn't want you to be Moses. I wanted you to be you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely, yes.
you need to be
Yeah.
you.
And
Yeah.
this is why I've said many times, Lance, you've probably heard me say this. I don't like the emulate Christ stuff, right? Because it's not about copying and pasting, right? It's kind of what we're doing. But it's about shining your light, which comes from the relationship you have to God, right? Because from that relationship, he can tell you what's the next thing to do, right?
Well, that's the whole difference between image and likeness. What you're talking about is a likeness is not just a mimic, right?
No.
That's a different thing.
Well,
And that
yeah.
when I would just say this, like Pete Kayfabe said, partition in which moment this one where we're all staring at devices. Like, I mean, I get that comment, but this is very different than watching just empty things on TikTok. As you guys are reading that, I have all this stuff going on in my brain. I'm thinking about ruach, right?
Yeah.
An image and sun, like it's the cognitive juices are flowing. I'm mapping, I'm thinking. You guys are clearly.
Well, you're participating in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and you guys throughout your series, like there's care back and forth with one another. There's friendship, right?
Yeah.
So this to me is not the empty camera obscura of projection. I think what the conversations you guys are doing is like the exact opposite of that.
No, it's like, have you ever seen, like, okay, so recently, I don't know, anything, any kind of news event or I don't know, you just see these crowds of people like at oh, I know, I think it was like Free Palestine rallies or whatever stuff that was going on with the farmers in Europe. And everybody's standing there like this, and they're all looking through their cameras and they're filming everything. Everybody. I can't hear you, Lance.
Open it up.
When he said all of that, like, so he's seeing movie and TV.
Yeah.
And then now that this thing has come here and you just go to these concerts or you see these, everyone's sitting here like at a beautiful, event, and everything is being like, you see all these screens up. It's like, put them down and see what's right in front of you.
And, Luke and I talked about this privately after we read the essay. And then I also just happened to talk to my daughter about, and not the essay, but just something else. But it was like, I don't take pictures very often, and it's because I don't have a phone in my pocket. And so I just don't have that mentality. And my kids are always like, Mom, you need to take pictures. You need to take more pictures. And I have to take, I mean, I got a camera actually for my birthday, but I have to figure out how to use it. But I have to take this outside, right? And I don't want to take it.
Right.
So, and then my daughter said to me, she said, Mom, you know what? I actually don't take pictures on purpose because I want to be in the moment. Yeah. I don't want to be looking through my camera, and I want it to be a memory. And I think you said the same thing.
Well, yeah, because like my wife always, she'll be like, Luke, I wish you would take more pictures.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I had more pictures of me and the babies, or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I get that. Like, I think that's honest and valid. And I'm like, but you want them to be candid, huh? You want them to be candid? Like, you don't want them to look staged.
Yeah.
The minute I pull it out, like, it's staged. So like I could try to be better at like capturing you when you're not looking and stuff, like,
yeah.
But like that's the thing, is you want them to have the ambiance of being like, I'm not there taking the picture,
Even my dogs, like if I point my iPad at them, everything changes. Like they get up, they come over, they whatever, But
well,
we also talked about, remember, Luke, we talked about, I was telling him that my husband traveled in the early 80s or maybe the late 70s. I can't remember. It was, or 80, right on the cusp. He went on this like big world travel and he ended up in Kathmandu, and the people there didn't like their pictures being taken because they believed that their souls were being stolen, right? And after I read this, I said to Luke, I said, it's interesting that they would have that intuition, because to fix something in time is to deny its becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so for them, they know that they're on a journey, and so that has to be their becoming, right? So something will always be in motion, and to take it and fix it into time is to take away that part of its that to grab the soul or something. I mean, that's how they would perceive it. But I thought, yeah. But I thought that's really interesting that they would actually have that right intuition about it, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a deep, like you said, that's a deep
intuition. Yeah. Yeah, that their souls are being stolen. And literally, I mean, in my opinion, all these people, like they can literally watch, like there were kids filming themselves running from gunmen on October the 7th in Israel.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It was all on their cameras. Like that would be the last thing that I would think about doing if I was there, just turning on my camera, And so that to me is also another abstraction, right? It's like that. You've got a thing between you and the actual event.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not even really in it.
Yeah.
Like that's what it feels like to me when I see people all just, doing this,
Well, you got to wonder how that obscures also like how you remember something as well. I keep on going back to this idea of memory because I feel like there's something there that I don't know how to touch on, but it's like I'm like, for instance, my son's going to have a repository of digital, like he's going to have a whole digital archive of like every single day of his dang life.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how many photos we take of him.
And they will actually become his memory. Like his actual memory won't, like, because
Is that also like a stealing of his memory? Because he would otherwise have all of his other sense perceptions that would be operating to inform him of that memory. But now that I'm pushing images in front of his face, stuff that he can see with his eyes, but he can't smell it, he can't taste it, he can't touch it. His limbic system is not activated. Like, why? Like, is he losing his memory through the process of constant crystallized images being shoved in his face about what his childhood looked like?
Yeah. Like, and now we're going back to that Alzheimer's thing, right? Like, isn't that what Alzheimer's is? It's just like a hardening of the whole brain.
Yeah, a calcification of.
Yeah, and I think, and when you get lost in the screen and you're taking these pictures and whatever, like so much when you think about remembering, and it smells. I have certain songs that take me right back to this car in 1988 and exactly what was going on, right? Like this sort of stuff like that. And this thing that's taking our attention, like it's not going to go away. And then the other thing I was thinking about through all this is I'm literally never going to put them on, but these new VR goggles they have going on, particularly like the Apple Pros, where it projects people. It came in and projects people's eyes and stuff. And then I was thinking about that. Like I'm literally decided it's cool. I get it. Like you would put it on and you go, wow, this is pretty cool. But I don't even want to put them on ever.
Yeah.
So my kids all will. But here's the deal. My kids all will. They're 20 something and they can't perceive, like they're like, why, Dad, what are you so worried about? Like, this is the old guy who doesn't understand the new way. And I'm like, oh man, guy, like there's no way, like I'm never going to convince him to not try that stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Yeah. I remember when I was in Telegraph Creek and I had this I don't know, she must have been 10-year-old First Nations girl in the truck with me. And we're driving down the road and she goes, "Oh, look, bear." And I looked on this hillside. I couldn't see a thing. I'm like, "Where?" And so I stopped the truck. I said, "Where?" She goes, "Oh, there's 3 right there." And she's 10. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, it wasn't bad eyesight, right? And then I saw them. But, her whole life actually depends on being able to see a bear. If she's walking down the road, she needs to see if there's a bear anywhere and where it is, right? And like we talked about this really early on in the Voxer, remember? Where the elders, so where my sister lives, the elders, they took the elders up into this range of mountains here around here called the Potato Range. And the Chilcotin people used to dig this plant. It's a wild plant, but it has a tuberous root, and they called them potatoes, and they only grow there. And so they used to harvest those, and they flew the elders up in helicopters, and everybody else had to walk up, the young people, and then the elders showed them how to harvest these potatoes, right? Potatoes. And the kids would be working away, on their potatoes, and the elder would come over and say, "You have to look around. Got to look around, And the kids would be like, "Well, I am looking." No. And they go back to work, and the elder would say, "Look around." So they needed to focus on what they were doing and look around. Mm-hmm. And that was an art, because they needed to know if something was coming, right? And so like all of this, because Peterson talks about the fact that our eyes are in the front of our face, and we end up reciprocally narrowing, is basically, he didn't use that language, but that's Vervaeke's language, right? And Sherry always wants us to picture something in our minds. I do, because that's how I think. I'm like, you can only know it if you can picture it. But
give us the story and never stop giving us the story.
Yeah. And so I don't know what I was saying with that. Potatoes and looking around, peripheral vision. Like, the longer we walk around with this right here, the less it's going to kill us. Like like if we don't walk off a cliff or get hit by a car or eaten by a bear because we're, doing that, right?
Yeah.
But then, like your example with dementia, that's really giving me food for thought, actually.
Absolutely. I think that's also linked to, you see this spike, you have the spike in autism, and spike of folks on there has to be some correlations to that. There just has to be, right?
Yeah. Even as a kind of sensory overload or sensory deprivation sort of situation that a picture sort of it ossifies one sensibility. That's it, and then everything else is like, how are you supposed to have the correct emotional response or experiential response? I don't know what I'm saying, but
yeah. Well, it's like the ability to read the room, right? Like to be able to read the room. Like where I grew up on the plains in the United States, you could just tell before, you had the radars on your camera, you could smell a storm. Like there's the smell when the storm's coming in.
Sure.
Like you just get this sense of, oh wait, it's going to storm, which is so wild. But like that stuff matters. Like, so, when the EMP hits and the electricity goes out, good Lord, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I often have power outages here, and we really enjoy them. Like sometimes they'll go for a whole week. And we're back in Telegraph Creek when that happens, right? Like we whip out the kerosene lamps. I always have lots of candles handy, and we've got gravity fed water and a wood cook stove. So we got running water. The toilets all work. We got our own septic, and we can cook and heat, right? So we just don't have light, and it's crazy. I mean, how quiet the house gets. That all that electrical hum just gone.
That's interesting. I was talking to Pete of Strange Theology this morning. He mentioned the same thing when the power goes out, like when the electrical hum goes away and the quietness.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So like the
EMF radiation.
Huh?
I'm just kidding. I got into like the EMF rabbit hole a long time.
Did you?
Yeah, I went deep down. I had like EMF readers. I was like holding them up everywhere I went.
Well, and I get it. One of my buddies, she was, ever since I've known her, my wife is, she just doesn't. She's scared to death of the power going out. Like, and this was even way before kind of this calamity stuff has come up here.
Yeah.
And like she's talked about us wanting to do some preparations because we're in a big city now, which is wild, and some things we need to do. And she's right, but yeah, the power went out here. Someone hit a pole or whatever, so it was out for a few hours, and it was just so amazing. As soon as it went out, like you don't get it, but as soon as you went out, like literally you could you knew sitting in our apartment here, you could hear dogs from like 2 blocks away that you didn't hear a few minutes before. You know what I mean? Like it's just there's a sound and a hum when the power's on that it's just you don't even think about it. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's totally wild. Our driveway is a mile long off of the Meldrum Creek Road, and we're 17 kilometers from the highway. So we don't get any sounds from the highway ever. And you occasionally hear a neighbor drive by, but there's only 4 other neighbors down the road, right? But the wind has to be right to hear the car go by on the Meldrum Creek Road. And when I would have people coming to stay on the farm to work in the past, that would be the first thing that they mentioned was how quiet it was. It was, and they would often say it was overwhelming, the silence. The silence was overwhelming to them.
Yeah.
It was like deafening silence. That's how it felt.
And then imagine the stars without all the light pollution and.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we have lots of those. But I mean, you can literally hear your own blood pumping in your ears. People are like, oh, I don't like that very much.
Well, we talk about being under the dome. I grew up out in the country, and we wasn't in a large enough city, so out where we were at, the night sky would pop, right? And every night, I can see a moon here in Houston. That's it, right? And maybe it's the North Stars or something like that. But literally every night, I got to sit up and look in awe of what you obviously see up there in Canada, right? But there's something about being able to be awed. I mean, we get sunrises and sunsets, which are amazing, and beautiful moons and things like that, which is good. But not having that dome to see every day, to just kind of shock you into awe. Because I don't know, how can you not look up at the night sky and not just, particularly like you say, Luke, when you're sitting out there and you just see.
Well, I'm telling you guys, it has changed so much in 20 years. Even my sister, they have a little balcony off their bedroom. Her and her husband, in the summer, they like to lay out and just watch the stars. And the sky is just full of satellites. It's just full. Like one night, my husband said, "Sherry, look out, look out, look out." And I looked out, 60. We call them strings of pearls now because they're those
Starlink
thingies. And they're just yeah. And there was a woman, well, actually there was a family that were old believers in Russia at the time when they were all being persecuted. And the youngest daughter of that family still living in the woods in Russia. Remember, what's her name? Lance. I've told you about her. Sister Vasia or something like that. But anyway,
That's her. Yeah. Sister Vasa.
No, it's not Vasa. It's not that one. But anyway, she's a Russian woman and was basically born in the bush in the 60s. Some surveyors saw their encampment and landed, and people hadn't seen another human being for like 50 years. Okay, something like that. Anyway, but she tells how her father noticed the first satellites in space, and he said, "Oh, look, they're putting things in the heavens now." He knew that it was human. You know.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is quite the intrusion.
Like that, if that's your life, you know your skies, right? Like we just have no clue. Like we've no clue.
Well, and that's the whole thing with Graham Hancock and everything else with those
Totally.
megaliths, and they're all tied. And basically, his theory, and I think it makes complete sense. Hey guys, you need to pay attention. You need to know, and you need to pay attention. We're warning you. This thing, whatever, like this thing happens, be ready, right?
It's amazing. We moved from the city to this old farmhouse where we've got a great view of the west, and we put in this huge window above the sink. And some nights the sunset is just so potent, and it's like we just stand there at the window instead of watching TV. It's like we just stand at the window and we're just like, holy shit, what have we been missing? It's like, and then even last night I got up and the moon was out, and we've got a marsh out back that's flooded right now. So it's just like, and the whole thing was just illuminated.
Oh, beautiful.
I could see ducks swimming in the moonlight, like out on the marsh. And I'm like, yeah, this is real. Like it just is. It's amazing to be able to see the horizon. Yeah. I want to read this line right here. By placing the sun instead of the punctiliar nothingness at the vanishing point, which, as we well knew, was really the point of projection from within the eye of the beholder. Like, he's talking about restoring this idea of the sun as being, I don't even know how to say it. Because what we did with the camera is we made it this punctiliar nothingness. The horizon line was the void. Right. It was a disappearance. It was an emptying, where like instead of viewing the horizon line as the emergence of light, life emerging from the horizon, then it's like the exact opposite of the way that we see it through this idea of perspective. Which has all this foreshortening in the disappearance, which I think is accurate to a certain degree, but it's like it misses the very fact that that's where the sun rises and sets, like where the moon comes up in the night sky is another radiant light, it's, yeah. I don't know anything else to say. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. That's a lot to think about now. And
this book right here has a bunch of really popular essays. There's one that I really want to get to that Sherry and I haven't read, called the Philology and the Incarnation.
Is it an expensive book? It looks like an expensive book.
It's not expensive. It's like $24 or something.
That's right in my budget.
Totally doable.
It does. I mean, obviously, this is like I don't want this to be behind a paywall for people to like read. If we could like scan these, I do have a scanner. I could maybe scan them and put them up as PDFs.
That's awful industrious. And I do apologize, but Sherry, I do think, and Luke, she sent you that image. You were mentioning Coleridge, right?
Yeah.
So Coleridge, is that right? Yeah, Coleridge. that image, it's Barfield and Steiner and then Coleridge's name in there, and it has these
I know.
things. And there's a
Yeah.
lot to, because at any rate, I was just listening when you were talking. I was searching for the camera and the harp, and then I saw this image, and then all of a sudden you started talking about perception, and those names were coming out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something to this image. I think it's interesting.
Slack, it's the author is Owen Barfield, and the title is The Rediscovery of Meaning and Other Essays.
Okay.
And they're all essays. They're not Barfield's big books, you know?
Mm-hmm.
No, and they're yeah, because like when I started with Barfield, I started with Saving the Appearances, and I was just like, oh my, and I was like early on my Grail quest here. I was just like, I don't know what he's saying.
Well, I'm ready for something new because I made my way through the George MacDonald.
Ooh.
This has just like Lilith and all the good stuff in here.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to bounce around a little bit, but I got excited when this came in the mail, and Luke was talking about some of the titles, and I was just like, what? There's another one in here called Dream, Myth, and Philosophical Double Vision. And I really want to know, where is fancy bread? Because this was a discussion that came up in the imagination essay. What's the difference between fancy and imagination?
Yeah, I know, because I listened to you guys do that. So I don't know what that is, but that's.
So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to digging into that one too. And
I'll be honest, I'm not a Barfield scholar in any way. I read excerpts from, he has a book called History of English Words, and I read some of that in my undergrad program. That's it.
I read some of Barfield in my house. I wasn't in an undergrad program. So you got more. At least, Luke, you read it in school with some help.
Yeah, seriously. I did have a professor lecturing on me. I don't know if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's great.
So, I don't know. We'll probably do some more. It'd be good to do more George MacDonald short stories because there's so many, and I don't want to give up on those. I want to keep.
Well, it's kind of fun to pepper this stuff throughout, right? Because they're both talking about the same things. I think actually, like all the Inklings, Barfield was also very influenced by George MacDonald, and or at least a lot of his things that he thought were confirmed by George MacDonald, something like that, right? And so, you know, like, I mean, his last chapter in here is called, where is it? I just saw it now. The Son of God and the Son of Man.
Oh, wow.
We'll save that to the end, and then it'll be our little we'll have to keep the people coming.
All right, I'll let you go. I am so sorry, because what happened when I went to go post that image, it said, oops, sorry, something went wrong. And I was watching you on my TV, and at the same time it crashed it out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was just trying to add that stupid image. I'm so sorry, you two.
It's okay.
That's why.
Yeah, you do not need to apologize.
No.
Yes,
I figured something went wrong, and it was just an easy.
It was a stinking phone. I've never tried to get in on my phone before, and then I tried to do that, and it futzed it up. So I'll stick with my computer.
Yeah.
These phones, they're evil. Cyborgs.
Yeah, pretty soon you can just focus right here, right?
Oh man,
Nope.
I just downloaded an app today where I can like do architectural designs. I'm doing a kitchen remodel, and you can put on the virtual reality goggles and walk through the kitchen remodel. I was like, all right, I got to delete this.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Lance, for joining us. That was good. And yeah, I can't say that we're going to do like an essay every time. We're going to just do whatever we feel like doing. Seems to be
Exactly.
working. It seems to be working.
We'll keep going. There's people that attend this. I'm surprised people even attend this.
I know. It's great.
Hundreds and hundreds of people watch these over, when you look at the views. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good night. It was great seeing y'all.
Good night, all. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
See you then.